have time for just one more question, and I'm going to bring up a question that we were talking about just earlier, and it's not related to the content here. It's on the issue of gun control. From Trayvon Martin in Florida to the 4 NYPD officers that were just shot in Brooklyn last week. Our mayor here in New York, Mayor Bloomberg, is on the national stage saying, for a long time now, saying it's about time that at a national level we have to deal with gun control and have a serious conversation. And again, coming back to the election year, it doesn't seem that any of the candidates want to talk about this without upsetting the NRA or special interests and trying to stay central. Do you think it's time we should have stricter gun control laws?
Yes, but the gun control issue is a classic example of the power of combined culture and ideology and interest, money. The NRA originally was organized by the gun industry after World War I because the war was over. Who was going to buy guns? So they wanted people to hunt more and have more guns in their homes. They had several decades when they were actually pretty responsible people. I, for example, was once given a lifetime membership in the NRA because I work with them to have all these training programs for people before they could start hunting, shooting, and we resolved some jurisdictional problems about where you can hunt and not. Then came the rise of the urban gangs and all the gun violence and the explosion of assault weapons. And in the 80s and early 90s, there were children in Los Angeles doing drive-by shooting drills in their schools so they'd learn how to drop down on the floor so they wouldn't be killed by random gunshots. I met a guy who was standing in line to sign up for a college course with his sister, and she was killed in a drive-by shooting. Not even the target. We've forgotten a lot of that. And so Americans began to examine whether we had any collective responsibility. And we only had one piece of gun control legislation passed, and it was pretty weak, by President Johnson, bless his heart, after Robert Kennedy and Martin Luther King were assassinated. Then when President Reagan was shot and Jim Brady was so grievously injured, he and Sarah started the Brady Handgun Initiative, calling for the background checks. The Democratic Congress passed it. President Bush vetoed it. And I said I would sign it, and I did. It was like the third bill I signed or something. And then I included a ban on assault weapons in the crime bill. And we lost the Congress in '94. I would say somewhere between 12 and 15 of the seats we lost were directly credited to the NRA. They just took people out. Now they say President Obama is the biggest threat to guns in human history. He's never done anything to them.
He's the biggest threat to everything.
One of his guys was running radio ads against Hillary in Pennsylvania saying she was going to take their guns away. Didn't work because it was Pennsylvania, but the point is, it's just total unfact-based hysteria. I'm the only person to ever beat him, and I beat him twice. But you need to understand why. It's culture. I didn't want Barack Obama to waste a minute on gun legislation because he's from Chicago. He was in the state Senate from the most liberal district in Chicago. Turned in a questionnaire once saying he'd support banning the manufacture and sale of all handguns. He had a long way to come. He had to do that. I, on the other hand, was shooting cans off a fence post with a .22 when I was 10. I know how to load a shotgun. I've been, turkey hunting and duck hunting and quail hunting. I have never hunted deer, although I was a hypocrite when I was a boy. I liked to eat it. But, so I knew what to do. They couldn't turn me into some freak, and I went after them. But there are two things you need to know. You will never get any action on this until it's just as big a voting issue for the people who are for responsible gun measures as it is for the people who are against it. I don't know how many conversations I've had with people like you who said, I just don't understand it. 65% of the people were for closing the gun show loophole to do the backgrounds. Why won't they do it? I'll tell you why. Because of the 65, only 10% will vote against you if you disagree with them. Of the 35% who don't want it closed, 30% of them will vote against you. So the real poll is not 65 to 35 for, it's 30 to 10 against. And not many politicians can lose 20% of the vote and still win an election. So if you really care about this, don't ask the politicians why they don't get any guts. Ask their voters why it's not a voting issue for them. And then the second thing is the politicians have to learn how to make it a voting issue. I wish I could scream every time I hear a member of Congress. This happened on health care in 2010. They do these polls and they say, well, the voters agree with us on health care and what we did for clean energy and, you know, this, that, and the other thing. I mean, on the environment, what we did for clean energy and jobs, and we can sell the stimulus, we can sell the auto bailout. This health care thing's really controversial, so we'll talk about the first four. That is the dumbest thing you can ever do. Where I come from, I was raised to believe that if you walk into somebody's living room and there's a pink elephant there, you don't get very far. Tell them how beautiful their sofa is. You got to talk about the pink elephant. Or think about your own experience. Amory and I, we've been friends for 30 years. Suppose I do something that, take a position or take an action that hurts his feelings. And I know it. The next time I see him, I have two choices. I can tell him I'm glad to see him, he's got a real pretty tie on. Or I can say, Amory, I know I pissed you off doing this. Here's why I did it. Now, let's assume he disagrees with my reasoning. We can still be friends because I have respected him by telling him something I know is eating on him. Whereas if I tell him his tie is pretty, I have insulted him. And I have said to him, you're just an irritant to me. Our friendship never meant a damn thing to me. I just don't want to have a hassle here. So if you're going to do something that's controversial, you have to turn into it, not away from it. It is the only way to respect your constituents. I declared for president in New England, in New Hampshire, in '96, the only state they thought I could lose, because I'd only won it by 1 point. And it was real Republican, and they were in the dumps. And they had since beat their only Democratic congressman, who I gave a pass, who voted against my budget, but voted for the gun bills. So I said to the young people who work for me, we're going to declare in New Hampshire at the opening of deer season in 1995. And we are going to go to this big cafe on the outskirts of Manchester where all the deer hunters gather before they go. And these kids looked at me and said, are you out of your mind? I said, no, and you've never been elected county judge. Trust me. So we go there, I wear a plaid shirt, all these guys in plaid shirts and hobnail boots, and they're getting ready to go out. And I stand up on this chair, and I looked at them, and I thanked them for voting for me. And I said, you know, I said I'd do these things, these 4 things, and we did them. So I hope you'll support me again, but we got to get something out of the way first. You beat your congressman up here 2 years ago, didn't you? And they're saying, what's that? And I said, you beat him because he voted for those gun bills, didn't you? And they're looking at it. I said, come on, isn't that why you beat him? One guy in the back said, you're damn right it is. I said, okay, here's the deal. He only voted for those bills because I asked him to. So if you missed a day or an hour, even an hour in the deer woods because of those bills, I want you to vote against me too. On the other hand, if you didn't, they lied to you, and you need to get even. We carried New Hampshire by 13 points because we turned into it. So that's the first thing I want to say. Look, this is a nightmare. Once the Republicans won the Congress, I couldn't get a bill to identify with taggants the things used in the bomb that Timothy McVeigh used to blow up the Oklahoma City Federal Building. And now there is another strategy if you're really serious about this. And this is the one, by the way, Paul Helmke, who runs the handgun control deal, is the former Republican mayor of Fort Wayne, Indiana, and a law school classmate of mine and a wonderful guy. Back when people actually sat and talked to each other and tried to figure out how they could work together. I loved the guy for nearly 40 years. But anyway, I told him, look at what happened in Colorado in 2000. Colorado had Columbine, you remember? And all the people were killed. So they put an initiative on the ballot to close the gun show loophole in Colorado. And people like my kinfolks in Arkansas. I come from a state where half the people have a hunting license. They don't trust politicians because all they got's fishing and hunting. Most of them don't have enough money to ever go on vacations or anything, but they do trust themselves. So they put this on the ballot, and the then governor of Colorado, a conservative Republican named Bill Owens, supported it. Al Gore supported it. George Bush opposed it because he was running for president, not just in Colorado, but in the whole country. George Bush defeated Al Gore 50-41 in Colorado. But closing the gun show loophole passed 70-30. Because people trusted themselves. They cut through the culture, they cut through the rhetoric, they cut through the ads. They trusted themselves, and they had seen those dead kids and teachers, and they did not want it to happen again. Virginia Tech. All we need to do to stop future Virginia Tech is to make sure reports on mental health problems receive the same scrutiny in the same comprehensive way on background checks as people who are felons, fugitives, and stalkers. That's all you need. You'd fix that. Couldn't be passed. Not in the Virginia legislature, not in the Congress. But if they put it on the ballot, it would pass. So if you care about this, you can see I care about this. I don't like the people I grew up with being turned into alien beings because they can be easily scared out of something that's part of their culture. But I don't want the president messing with something because he's got bigger fish to fry. We got to get this economy going. We got to deal with global warming. We got all these other problems. And I had unusual cultural advantages to deal with this on a legislative basis. But I also have to live every day of my life knowing that I beat 15 members of Congress doing it. Because I never dreamed that if they didn't come from a district like the state I came from, that they wouldn't know to turn into it instead of run away from it. So if you care, this is a big issue for America. And this stand your ground law, this is not a good law. Because it's more than stand your ground. It's like take a few steps forward, and when you combine stand your ground with everybody and their mother can have a concealed weapon. And it's just crazy. So we are going too far back toward people can do whatever the heck they want and live with the consequences, and too far away from our common responsibilities. And let me give you one other example you haven't mentioned. Virginia recently repealed its law because the NRA has to keep busy, limiting people in Virginia to one handgun per month. Purchase. You can only buy one a month. You can still buy 12 a year, right? But you would have thought we had repealed the Bill of Rights when they did that. Now, every New Yorker should be grateful to them because they did that out of our sense of common citizenship, because illegal handgun purchases in Virginia were becoming illegal purchases on the street in New York. Before Virginia adopted its one-a-month law, 40% of the illegal guns picked up by police officers in New York came from Virginia. 40%. And one of the reasons for the decline in violent deaths and shooting deaths in New York over the last 15 years is the fact that the Virginia legislature and the governor were willing to do that. They did us a good turn. We had a sense of our common connections. But they repealed it like a hot knife through butter because that's the issue that the NRA chose to keep busy on this year. And then everything is the end of the world. So that needs to be fixed too. But you have two choices if you care about it. You got to make it a voting issue for you. You got to train the politicians to turn into the fight, not away from it. Or you can make it a referendum, and if you'll spend the money and the time and effort, you'll make more progress quicker by putting it on the ballot and trusting all these gun toters who like to hunt and don't like it when innocent people get killed to do the right thing for their own people. That's what you got to do.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. President, and thanks for joining us. Thank you. It was a real honor and pleasure to have you with us here, and keep up the great work that you're doing. Really appreciate it. Ladies and gentlemen,